They often say, never judge the power of a fire merely by the cold ashes on the surface. But within the cold marble corridors of Wellington University, where reputation and status are deemed the sole measures of intellect, that lesson had been long forgotten. This is the story of an uneven confrontation between a titan of the mathematical world wielding absolute power and a destitute young man standing in soaked shoes amidst a snowstorm. An arrogant challenge. Solve this and get an A. A trap set to destroy one's dignity. But little did they know, sometimes the loudest roar doesn't come from the one shouting from the podium. It comes from the silence. The suffocating silence of 200 people witnessing the impossible become reality in just 9 minutes and 23 seconds. Step into the harsh winter of Chicago to witness the moment prejudice is shattered, and true talent finds a way to shine, even when buried under the deepest layers of snow. The wind outside Wellington Hall howled through the stained glass windows like a mourning ghost, but it was still warmer than Professor Arthur Sterling's voice. Outside, a late November blizzard was burying Chicago in a suffocating blanket of white, but inside Lecture Hall 304, the steam radiators hissed aggressively, lulling 200 students in cashmere sweaters into a comfortable daze. Only Marcus Thorne felt the cold biting into his marrow. He sat huddled in the darkest corner of the back row, trying desperately to hide his canvas sneakers, which were soaked through with black slush. The number 56 bus had broken down 3 miles back, forcing him to walk the rest of the way in the storm. A small dark puddle of melted snow was forming beneath his desk, a silent accusation of his intrusion into this sanctuary of wealth and intellect. Professor Sterling stood at the podium, gripping a piece of chalk like a scepter. He had been droning on about the analytic continuation of the Riemann zeta function, but suddenly, the rhythmic scratching of chalk on the board stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. Sterling slowly removed his gold-rimmed glasses, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room before locking onto Marcus with laser precision. "Mr. Thorne," his voice cut through the air, low but sharp. "The sound of your teeth chattering is disrupting the entire class's train of thought." A ripple of suppressed giggles ran through the front rows. Marcus clenched his jaw so hard it ached, jamming his frozen hands deep between his knees. "Sorry, Professor," he whispered, his voice raspy from the chill. Sterling didn't return to his lecture. Instead, he descended from the podium, his Italian leather shoes clicking ominously against the polished oak floor as he approached Marcus's desk. He looked down at the puddle of dirty water near Marcus's feet with undisguised disgust. "Look at you. Soaked, shivering, and pathetic. If you find the climate so disagreeable, Mr. Thorne, perhaps you should be outside shoveling the snow instead. Manual labor seems far more suited to your background than advanced mathematics." Blood rushed to Marcus's face, heating his frozen skin. It wasn't shame. It was a slow-burning fury. He looked up, meeting Sterling's gaze. There was no pleading in his dark eyes, only a stubborn, smoldering defiance. That look pierced Sterling's armor of superiority. It offended him. A scholarship case had no right to look at a tenured professor with such pride. Sterling spun on his heel and marched back to the blackboard. He aggressively erased the previous equations, the eraser clouding the air with white dust. Then he began to write. The chalk screeched against the slate. 1 line, 2 lines, then an entire wall of complex variables appeared. It was a monstrous hybrid of number theory and non-Euclidean geometry, a problem designed to break spirits, not to be solved. He turned and tossed the piece of chalk toward the back of the room. It arced through the air and landed with a soft thud right next to Marcus's wet sneaker. "If you think that defiant look in your eyes holds any value," Sterling sneered, crossing his arms over his tweed chest, "come up here and prove me wrong. Solve it. I'll give you 10 minutes. If you solve it, I will give you an A for the entire semester right now, and you never have to drag your wet carcass into my classroom again. But if you fail, you will go down to the registrar's office and withdraw from this university yourself." The lecture hall held its breath. Leo, Marcus's roommate, nudged him frantically. "Don't do it, Marcus," he hissed. "He's baiting you." "That's impossible." Marcus didn't hear him. He stared at the white chalk lying on the dirty floor. It looked small and discarded just like him. Slowly, painfully, he bent down. His numb fingers closed around the chalk. He stood up, his old wooden chair scraping loudly against the floor. Marcus stepped out of the row. Squelch. Squelch. His wet shoes made a humiliating sound in the dead silence. Step by step, he walked toward the executioner's block. He didn't look at the students. He locked his eyes on the dancing numbers on the board. When he reached the front, the old professor smiled the smile of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. Sterling tapped a manicured finger against the crystal face of his gold Rolex. Your time starts now. The ticking of Professor Sterling's gold Rolex echoed in the dead silence of the lecture hall, each second striking the air like a tiny hammer against Marcus's chest. Tick, tick, tick. For the first 3 minutes, Marcus didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the wall of white numbers, his hand hanging loosely by his side. A few stifled giggles erupted from the third row. Someone whispered, "He's frozen." "This is painful." Sterling leaned back against his desk, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips as he prepared the words to dismiss the boy forever. But Marcus wasn't frozen. He was remembering. He heard his mother's voice crackling over the phone line the night before, tired but firm. "Don't let them make you forget who you are, baby. You speak a language they can't even hear." Marcus took a deep breath. He didn't see the sneers anymore. He didn't see the expensive sweaters or the judgment. He only saw the structure. The equation on the board wasn't a monster. It was a map, and he knew the shortcut. At minute 4, his hand moved. He didn't start with the standard algebraic breakdown that Sterling had taught them. Instead, he drew a diagram. A complex, multi-dimensional shape that looked more like abstract art than mathematics. The giggling stopped. A confused murmur rippled through the room. "Is Heath drawing a picture?" a student whispered loudly. Marcus worked faster now. The chalk became an extension of his mind. He wasn't solving the problem linearly. He was folding it, twisting the logic using principles of topology that wouldn't be covered until graduate school. The white dust coated his dark, trembling fingers, but his lines were steady, surgical. By minute 6, the atmosphere shifted from mockery to confusion. By minute 7, it turned into awe. A brilliant student in the front row, the son of a Yale mathematician, sat up straight, his mouth slightly open. "Wait," he muttered, loud enough for Sterling to hear. "He's translating the variables into geometric planes. That's actually working." Sterling's smirk vanished. He uncrossed his arms and took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. He looked at the board, then at his watch, then back at the board. The color began to drain from his face. He realized with a jolt of terror that the boy wasn't just solving the problem, he was dismantling it. Marcus was finding a bridge where Sterling had only ever seen a wall. Minute 8 passed. The only sound in the cavernous hall was the aggressive, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the chalk against the slate. Marcus was in a trance, sweating despite the cold, his mind racing light years ahead of his hand. He slashed through the final set of variables, connecting the geometric proof back to the original number theory question. It was elegant. It was undeniable. It was perfect. At minute 9, Marcus wrote the final 3 letters at the bottom of the board, QED. Quod erat demonstrandum. He set the chalk down on the ledge. It rolled slightly before coming to a stop. Marcus turned around to face the room. He looked at Sterling. The professor was staring at the board, his mouth opening and closing slightly, like a fish out of water. No words came out. Marcus shifted his gaze to the clock on the wall. 9 minutes and 23 seconds. The silence that filled the room was heavier than the snowstorm outside. It was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket of shock. 200 students sat motionless, unable to process that the boy with the wet shoes and the faded hoodie had just outsmarted the god of their department. Marcus brushed the chalk dust off his gray sleeve. He looked straight into Sterling's pale, stunned face. His voice was calm, carrying to the back of the room without needing to be raised. "Professor," Marcus said, "is the promise of that still valid?" Professor Sterling didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply smiled a smile that was colder and more dangerous than the blizzard raging outside the window. "Of course, Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, his voice silky smooth as he straightened his cufflinks. "I am a man of my word. You have enough for this specific class participation. But remember, A single clever trick does not make a mathematician. The applause that day felt like a victory, but by the following week, Marcus realized it was merely the opening bell of a war he wasn't equipped to fight. It started subtly. On Tuesday, Sterling returned the midterm exams. Marcus flipped his paper over, expecting a score that reflected his perfect answers. Instead, a jagged red C- stared back at him. Next to his proofs, Sterling had scrawled in aggressive red ink. Lacks academic rigor. Unconventional notation. Do not rely on party tricks. When Marcus went to the department office to protest, Sterling didn't even look up from his mahogany desk. If you disagree with my assessment of your rigor, Mr. Thorne, perhaps you should consider whether this program is the right fit for you. He paused, then dropped the hammer. I have already sent a formal note to the scholarship committee regarding your fluctuating performance. If your final grade falls below AB+, which it currently is, your funding will be revoked immediately. Marcus walked home that evening feeling the weight of the world crushing his chest. The snow had stopped, but the bitter wind remained. Near his rundown apartment building, he saw Mrs. Gable, his 70-year-old neighbor, struggling to shovel the ice from her walkway. Despite his exhaustion and fear, Marcus stopped. He took the shovel from her trembling hands and finished the job in silence. You look like you're carrying a mountain, child, Mrs. Gable said, handing him a thermos of hot cocoa. I won a battle, Mrs. Gable, Marcus said quietly. But I think I'm losing the war. The old woman looked at him with eyes that had seen decades of hardship. Bullies never stop when they lose, baby. They just change their tactics. They wait for you to blink. So don't blink. Her words echoed in his mind later that night. Marcus sat in his cold, dimly lit room, surrounded by stacks of paper. He wasn't studying for the next exam. That was pointless now. Sterling would fail him no matter what he wrote. Instead, Marcus was studying Sterling. If the king wanted a war, Marcus needed to know his enemy. He pulled up Sterling's most famous work, the 1995 paper on convergence theory that had built the professor's entire reputation and secured his tenure. Marcus read it line by line, equation by equation, searching for the brilliance everyone claimed was there. For hours, the only sound was the scratching of his pen and the humming of the old radiator. Then, around 3 a.m., Marcus stopped. He frowned. He flipped back to page 14, then forward to the conclusion, then back to page 14 again. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, harder than it had during the 10-minute challenge. There, buried deep in the middle of theorem 3.7, was an assumption. Sterling had assumed a convergence property held for all cases in the domain, but he hadn't proven it. He had skipped a step. And as Marcus ran the numbers for the edge cases, the math fell apart. The foundation of Arthur Sterling's career wasn't solid rock. It was sand. Marcus picked up a red marker, the same color Sterling used to grade his papers. His hand trembled, not from cold, but from the terrifying realization of what he was holding. He circled the error on page 14. You're not a genius, Professor, Marcus whispered to the empty room, his breath visible in the chilly air. You're a fraud. Marcus had naively believed that truth was like sunlight eventually. It would pierce through any cloud. But he forgot that in the middle of a blizzard, the person holding the torch is the one who decides where the path leads. 2 days after discovering the error in Professor Sterling's famous 1995 paper, Marcus made a choice. Instead of exposing the fraud publicly, he sent a private, respectful email to Sterling. He wrote, Professor, I believe I found a calculation gap in theorem 3.7. It might be a simple oversight, but it affects the conclusion. I wanted to bring this to you directly so we could discuss it. It was an act of mercy, a gesture of respect from a student to a teacher. That mercy was his mistake. On Wednesday morning, Marcus was summoned to the dean's office. The room smelled of old leather and furniture polish, the scent of established power. Dean Foster sat behind a massive oak desk, looking grave. Professor Sterling sat in a velvet armchair by the window, looking like a tragic victim. Mr. Thorne, Dean Foster began, sliding a printed document across the desk. Professor Sterling has filed a formal complaint against you for academic harassment and attempted blackmail. Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. What? No, I sent him a correction. I was trying to help. Help. Sterling's voice trembled with feigned indignation. You sent me a threatening email implying that if I didn't raise your grade to an A, you would spread baseless rumors about my life's work. You are attempting to weaponize a misunderstanding of complex theory to intimidate a tenured faculty member. That's not what I wrote. Marcus protested, his voice rising. Read the email. I never mentioned my grade. We have the email right here, the dean interrupted, tapping the paper. Marcus looked down. It was his email, but it had been selectively edited. The respectful context was gone. Only the questioning of the theorem remained, making it look aggressive and arrogant. Effective immediately, the dean said coldly, your scholarship is suspended pending a full disciplinary review. You are barred from attending classes until the investigation concludes in January. Suspended. January. The words echoed in Marcus's ears like a death sentence. Without the scholarship, he couldn't pay rent. He couldn't send money home for his mother's blood pressure medication. He was done. Marcus walked out of the administration building into the biting wind. He didn't go back to his dorm. He couldn't face Leo. Instead, he found refuge in Betty's Diner, a cheap greasy spoon spot near the edge of campus where coffee cost $1 and nobody cared who you were. He sat in a booth with cracked red vinyl seats, counting the coins in his pocket. $3.50. That was his net worth. He stared out the window at the holiday decorations going up on the street lamps. Christmas was coming, and he had nothing. Mind if I sit? A woman's voice broke his trance. Marcus looked up to see a woman in her 50s, wearing a sharp wool coat and a silk scarf. It was Dr. Elena Rossi, the visiting professor from Zurich who had been in the lecture hall during the 10-minute challenge. Marcus stiffened. If you're here to tell me to drop out, save your breath. Dr. Rossi sat down uninvited, signaling the waitress for 2 coffees. I'm here because I saw what you did to that blackboard last week. And I'm here because I know you're right about the 1995 paper. Marcus froze. You know, I've suspected that gap in theorem 3.7 for a decade, Rossi said, leaning in, her voice low. But Sterling is powerful. He controls grants, tenures, journals. To attack him without absolute proof is career suicide. We all stayed silent. But you didn't. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table toward him. Next week is Christmas Eve. It also happens to be the opening night of the National Mathematics Symposium in New York City. 2,000 of the world's best minds will be there. I have a speaking slot reserved for a promising young theorist. I want you to take it. Marcus stared at the ticket inside the envelope. Why would you do this? Sterling will destroy you too. Because mathematics belongs to the truth, not to the powerful, Rossi said softly. But listen to me carefully, Marcus. This is all or nothing. If you go there and fail to prove his error, you will be blacklisted from every university in the country. But if you succeed, you change everything. Marcus looked down at the ticket, then at his reflection in the dark window, a boy in a faded hoodie with $3 to his name. He thought about his mother. He thought about the red ink on his exam. He thought about the smirk on Sterling's face. Slowly, the fear in his eyes hardened into something sharper, something dangerous. He picked up the ticket. I'll go, Marcus said. The crystal chandeliers of the New York Convention Center glittered like thousands of captured stars, but the air inside was tense enough to cut glass. It was Christmas Eve, yet for Marcus Thorne, it felt more like the minutes before an execution. He stood backstage, smoothing the lapels of the cheap polyester suit Dr. Rossi had bought him. His heart hammered against his ribs. Out there, 2,000 of the world's most brilliant mathematicians sat in velvet seats, waiting. A 20-foot Christmas tree sparkled on the far side of the stage, its cheerful lights mocking the nausea churning in Marcus's stomach. Suddenly, the schedule on the monitor flickered. The order of speakers had changed. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Due to a scheduling conflict, Professor Arthur Sterling will present first. Marcus froze. Sterling walked onto the stage to polite applause. He looked confident, regal in a tuxedo. He took the microphone and smiled a smile of supreme benevolence. Tonight, Sterling began, I want to share a journey of self-reflection. In reviewing my own seminal work from 1995, I have identified a methodological gap. A gap I have personally corrected to ensure the integrity of our field. Marcus watched in horror from the wings as Sterling pulled up slides. They were his corrections. The red ink Marcus had drawn in his freezing apartment was now digitized into clean blue graphics on a massive 4K screen. Sterling walked the audience through the error and the fix, claiming every insight as his own evolution of thought. He stole the truth, wrapped it in his reputation, and presented it as a gift to the community. He stole it, Marcus whispered, his knees buckling. He took everything. Dr. Rossi grabbed his shoulder, her grip like iron. He took your past, Marcus. He can't take your talent. Go out there and show them something he can't steal. Sterling finished to thunderous applause. As he walked off stage, he passed Marcus. He didn't say a word. He just winked. And now, the announcer said, "Please welcome a student from Wellington University, Mr. Marcus Thorne." Marcus walked into the blinding spotlight. The applause was scattered, confused. Who was this kid following the keynote speaker? Marcus stood at the podium. He had no slides. His prepared speech about the error was now useless. If he gave it, he would look like a plagiarist parroting Sterling. He took a deep breath. He looked at the audience, then at the massive digital whiteboard behind him. "Professor Sterling just gave a wonderful presentation on the past," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly before steadying. "But to prove that the corrected methodology he showed you is truly robust, we shouldn't just look backward. We should look forward." He turned to the digital board and picked up the stylus. "I will now use that framework to solve the Colburn conjecture, a problem that has remained unsolved for 40 years. And I will do it right here. Live." A gasp ripped through the auditorium. The Colburn conjecture was a beast. It destroyed careers. Sterling, sitting in the front row, turned the color of ash. He half rose from his seat as if to object, but it was too late. Marcus started writing. This wasn't a lecture, it was a performance. He attacked the problem with a ferocity that stunned the room. He wasn't just doing math, he was fighting for his life. He applied the geometric topology method he had used in the classroom, weaving it through the Colburn variables. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the tap-tap-tap of the stylus. Sweat poured down Marcus's back. His arm ached. The logic was tight, dangerous, walking a razor's edge between brilliance and madness. At the 15-minute mark, a Fields medalist in the third row stood up, leaning forward, realizing what was happening. "My God," she whispered. "He's closing the loop." At 18 minutes, Marcus slashed the final proof across the screen. The logic held. The impossible was solved. He lowered the stylus. His chest heaved. He turned back to the audience, his eyes finding the one man who mattered. Sterling was slumped in his chair, looking small, defeated, and terrified. Marcus gripped the podium, his voice ringing out with the force of a judge delivering a verdict. "Professor," he asked, pointing to the glowing solution behind him, "do you claim this new method is yours too?" For one long, suspended second, the silence in the New York Convention Center was absolute. It was a silence so deep it felt like the entire world had stopped spinning to look at the glowing numbers on the board. Then the dam broke. It didn't start with applause. It started with a roar. 2,000 mathematicians, students, and professors jumped to their feet as one. The sound was deafening, a physical wave of noise that shook the decorations on the Christmas tree. The Fields medalist in the third row was clapping so hard her hands were red. Even the cameramen filming the event had stopped checking their angles to stare at the stage in disbelief. Marcus stood frozen, the stylus still gripping his hand, breathless. He looked down at the front row. Arthur Sterling was standing, but he wasn't clapping. He was staring at Marcus with a look of hollow devastation. He looked around, perhaps expecting his colleagues to be outraged by this upstart student. Instead, he saw his peers ignoring him completely. They were surging past him, pushing into the aisles to get closer to the stage. Sterling reached out to grab the arm of a department head from Princeton. "But the methodology," Sterling stammered, his voice lost in the din. "It's the one I just presented." The Princeton professor brushed Sterling's hand away without even looking at him, his eyes fixed on Marcus. "Move aside, Arthur. You're blocking the view." That was the verdict. There was no trial, no shouting match, No public confession. Sterling wasn't dragged away in handcuffs. He was simply erased. In the eyes of the community he worshipped, he had ceased to matter. He stood alone in the middle of the celebrating crowd, a ghost haunting his own funeral, drowning in the irrelevance he had always feared. Marcus was swarmed. Business cards were shoved into his hands. MIT, Stanford, Oxford. Call us, they shouted. Full fellowship. Whatever you need. Dr. Rossi appeared at his side, her eyes shining with tears. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just squeezed his arm and whispered, "You did it, kid. You really did it." It took an hour for Marcus to escape the hall. When he finally stepped out through the heavy glass doors, the cold air hit him like a blessing. It was midnight. Christmas had officially arrived. New York City was quiet under a fresh layer of snow. The streetlights created halos in the mist. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking, not from cold this time, but from the adrenaline leaving his body. He dialed the number he knew by heart. It rang once, twice. Hello. His mother's voice was thick with sleep, but laced with worry. Marcus? Is everything okay? It's late. Marcus looked back at the convention center, then up at the night sky where snowflakes danced like confetti. He thought about the slushy bus ride, the red ink, the fear of the eviction notice. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, his chest felt light. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I need you to wake up and turn on the news. They might be talking about me." "What happened?" "Marcus, are you in trouble?" "No, Mama," he smiled, tears hot on his cheeks. "We're not in trouble anymore. We're okay. We're going to be okay forever." He listened to her gasp on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of happy sobbing. Marcus lowered the phone but kept it close to his heart. He buttoned his cheap suit jacket against the wind and stepped onto the sidewalk. The snow crunched beneath his feet, a solid, undeniable sound. He walked into the lights of the city, leaving the silence behind him. True brilliance doesn't need a spotlight to shine. It only needs an opportunity. Marcus Thorne taught us that prejudice is a wall we build ourselves, but talent is the hammer that breaks it down. Never let the coldness of the world freeze your potential, and never judge a book by its worn-out cover. If this story warmed your heart today, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth.